Hello, everyone. Today we are meeting at the Daktilo 1984 screens, and we will be exploring how foreign agent narratives and legislation are reshaping the media landscape across Europe. This notion was once introduced under the pretext of transparency or national sovereignty, based on legislative efforts to combat foreign influence at a point. Such measures have increasingly become tools of control and intimidation, stigmatizing independent media as puppets of foreign powers and eroding public trust in journalism. Recently, Civicus has published a global report on development of foreign agent laws around the world, from the US to Africa to Europe, Asia, and in every continent at the moment we have some sort of foreign agent laws. But we are today focusing on the media freedom rapid responses latest half-year monitoring report on media freedom violations. And my colleague from the International Press Institute on the Europe Network and Advocacy Officer, Teona Sekhniashvili, is joining me today to discuss how these developments in Slovakia, Hungary, and Georgia reflect a wider trend of shrinking civic space and how international and domestic actors can respond to protect media freedom. My name is Gürkan Özturan. I'm the Media Freedom Monitoring Officer at the European Center for Press and Media Freedom, and I will be asking my questions to Teona today. Teona, welcome. I want to ask you a first question to begin with. Could you briefly explain what foreign agent laws are and how they have evolved in Europe over the last years?
Hi, Gurkan. Thank you very much for the invitation. I think you already spoke in your introduction what foreign agent laws are and how dangerous they can be. Yeah, these are the restrictive laws that are aimed at undermining and suppressing civil society and media mostly. And we have seen that they have been really spreading like wildfire across Europe and beyond. Between January and June 2025, Mapping Media Freedom recorded a total of 45 press freedom violations related to foreign agent laws, and this is really something that is alarming. In total, 63 media related persons or entities have been targeted by foreign agent laws or narratives that are related to foreign funding. So the weaponization of such laws, I think it should be mentioned, that originated in Russia. First, these laws applied to NGOs, and they were considered as the laws that were targeting, NGOs exclusively. But then this application extended beyond NGOs to media outlets and individuals. And if in Georgia there were several drafts of foreign agent laws, and if first authorities asked for some sort of approval for foreign funding, in the end, they just did not need this, and anyone under foreign influence, loosely defined term, foreign influence or receiving foreign support from abroad, could be designated as a foreign agent. And yes, like I said, they seem to be really contagious. The foreign agent laws are obviously part of the authoritarian playbook, and they have been used in many countries in Europe. Actually, they have been adopted in some of the countries, like in Georgia, like in Bosnia and Republika Srpska. They are already laws. They are already adopted. Now, they have been tabled in Hungary. They have been tabled also in Serbia. Something similar to the foreign agent law has been also adopted in Slovakia. I guess we can speak about that in detail a little later. But already from the example of Russia and from the example of Georgia, we can say that unfortunately those laws are quite efficient in achieving what they aim at. They are used to stifle dissent, and to completely eradicate, in fact, independent and critical voices, including those of free press and independent journalists.
How exactly do they impact journalism? How are these laws being used against journalists so far? Can you please elaborate on that?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's really important. We mentioned narratives a couple of times, and I think it's really important to mention from the very beginning that before these foreign agent laws are adopted, we see and witness smear campaigns that last years and years and that come from the authoritarian and illiberal regimes. They are referring to the press and the members of the press as spies, as agents. So once the laws are already tabled, the society, the trust in journalism is to a large extent already eroded, and the journalists are already labeled as enemies of the state. Yeah, there is different language used in different parts of the world, but the main patterns are still the same. That is one part. Then, unfortunately, and I'm saying it unfortunately because in some parts of the world, free and independent journalism depends on foreign funding. That was the case in Georgia. Like, independent media has never been self-sufficient. And it's not because they didn't want to, and it's not that because independent media wanted to be dependent on grants from the EU or the US. It's because the market is small and the public was not very willing to pay for news. Foreign agent laws first undermined foreign funding, or like they labeled foreign funding as intervention in the sovereignty of from foreign countries in national politics, and so on and so forth. But then outright banned foreign funding. In Georgia, what we are seeing is that foreign funding is simply banned. And I can speak about different foreign agent kind of laws that are in place in Georgia right now. So denying independent media foreign funding in some parts of the world, including Georgia and including those countries where the public is not so much willing to pay for news, basically means killing journalism, killing independent media, because other media are paid, basically funded by oligarchic actors. They are funded by the ruling party or people associated with ruling party. Media capture is a big problem, which basically means that, including other things, that the public broadcaster is captured in these countries. That the mostly the large parts of the media outlets are captured by ruling party affiliated businesses or conglomerates like Kashma in Hungary. So yeah, again, denying foreign funding means that many of these media outlets cannot continue working at all. They cannot continue their operations at all. And the label of foreign agent is something that can be more destructive than it might seem it can be. And we have seen this in Russia. We have seen that most of the media outlets, even now, they continue to label themselves as foreign agents, even if they work from the exile, because consuming the news from foreign agents is also a crime. So it's criminalizing independent journalism. That's what these laws achieve in the end.
Thank you, Teona. And as we have seen also in Turkey recently, the foreign agency accusations have been named against the journalist after he was arrested and his news platform was confiscated by the government, and a trustee was appointed to rule the news platform, even though there is no legislative background to make this accusation. However, in Turkey, again, we are also not unfamiliar with the concept. Yet another country, Slovakia, as you just mentioned, also passed a law. In the past year, Slovakian parliament passed a fast-tracked transparency law under a different name than Hungarian or Russian models, but it does echo what was already present in Hungary and Russia. Could you unpack what this law entails and why it raises alarm for media freedom in Slovakia?
Yeah, thank you, Gürkan. It's a very interesting example, and I think that the Slovakian law was really modeled in a similar fashion as the Russian one, as maybe Hungarian one and Georgian one, but I think that it was. At the end, it was really significantly diluted from the original plans. So, to answer your question, about what this law entails. So this law requires NGOs to disclose donors' contributions over 5,000 euros, list governing body members, and submit annual financial reports. That's one thing. Another thing is that non-profit organizations, foundations, and associations with annual income of 35,000 euros will be required to submit a transparency report. So that's basically what this law entails. And also very important is that there are really significant penalties. The penalties are really stiff in case of non-compliance. They range from 1,000 to 10,000 euros. So repeat violations could trigger even further sanctions. When the law was first approved, I think in April 2024, if I'm not mistaken, and was eventually also approved in April. But first, it suggested that NGOs that in the very first version, it was referring to NGOs. It would label NGOs as foreign agents. But at a later stage, the phrasing was changed. That it would label NGOs as lobbyists or lobbyist groups. After criticism from the European Commission, any mention of foreign agents or lobbyist groups disappeared. So the Slovak law is harmful as well. Really, I mean, disclosing who the donators, who the contributors to different NGOs and media outlets are, might breach the privacy of these people. So it is really tricky, and also it aids the burden of for reporting on these media outlets or NGOs. However, there will not the media and NGOs will not have to. If they're funding, they will not have to label themselves as foreign agents, and there will be no blacklists or no registry or things like that. So still, it's harmful, and there is always a chance that in later stages the law will be amended and provisions about labels will be added in the future. So we definitely need to keep a close eye on and continue calling for the repeal of this particular law. But I mean, when you were talking about Slovakia, I also wanted to say that in Slovakia probably this law will not have the same impact on media because major media outlets in Slovakia are self-sufficient. Like we have Daniken, we have Danik Sme, Actuality. Each of them, to my knowledge, receive reader funding, and they have really strong and sustainable business models. And I think that this example really outlines how important it is for media to be self-sufficient and develop strong and resilient business models.
It definitely is an important example to be followed by other media outlets and other news readers in other countries as well. And unlike Hungary and Georgia, Slovakia avoided the term foreign agents or foreign influence, but in its essence, the law retains the same kind of risks for civil society and media, even though the media currently is self-sufficient. But moving on to Hungary. Hungary has been at the forefront of foreign agent laws in the EU. They use the term sovereignty to refer to the contents of the law as a justification for limiting foreign funding in the country. Could you outline what the Transparency of Public Life bill in Hungary proposed and why this was concerning for media freedom?
Yeah, thank you, Gürkan. Before speaking about this law, before speaking about this law on transparency of public life, I think it should be mentioned that 2 years back in 2023, the Sovereignty Protection Act, another really restrictive law, was adopted in Hungary after just 2 weeks of debate at the parliament and without proper public consultation. Our organizations, IPI as well as the CPMF, raised alarms on this and argued that such, vague wording of the law and such a broad scope would allow pressure from the state on media outlets that receive foreign funding and that are critical of the government. And that really happened. Based on the Sovereignty Protection Act, Hungary launched a Sovereignty Protection Office, a new authority that had the power to launch investigations into the activities of NGOs and media outlets. And basically, these investigations were like really large-scale smears of media outlets like Atlazzo, one of the leading investigative outlet, or NGOs like Transparency International in Hungary. However, this law did not have any sanctioning power, and that's really a very important point. And many journalists, I remember, visiting Hungary in last March, and they argued that if the Sovereignty Protection Office had sanctioning power, things would be really different, and that would mean that the viability of Hungarian media would be questionable. And very shortly after, this law on the transparency of public life was tabled in Hungary, which basically was the most serious attack on Hungarian media in years, and probably one of the biggest attacks after a decade-long campaign by the Fidesz government to stigmatize independent media and erode media pluralism. It would so I mentioned the Sovereignty Protection Office, and this law would grant the Sovereignty Protection Office powers to basically arbitrarily recommend any foreign funding legal entity, including NGOs or media outlets, and add them to a list. There would be a government shortlist. It's very similar concepts as it's very similar to the concept of the foreign agent registry, basically. Basically, the SPO would choose these organizations based on one criteria: whether they pose a threat to the country's sovereignty or not. So it would arbitrarily decide, oh, this organization is foreign funded and it poses a threat to Hungarian sovereignty, whatever that means, right? Then those media outlets added to the list would be blocked from receiving any grant, any donation. I mean, not only grants, but also donations from the EU member states or from the European Union, as well as the countries outside of the bloc, obviously. But basically, if, I don't know, somebody from Slovakia donated to the Hungarian media outlet, that would be a violation of the law. Then basically, like there was some exception that Hungarian anti-money laundering authority would be able to grant an exemption on a media outlet that is foreign funded. Anyway, then there were like also really, really serious and heavy fines in case of non-compliance. The money laundering authority would have powers to impose a fine of 25 times the amount of funding that a certain NGO or media outlet would receive. And they would have to pay this fine, which is 25 times the amount of the grant they would receive. They would have to pay it within 15 days. That basically means that smaller media outlets would be destroyed financially by this. And in case of repeated offense, they would face closures, threats to be shut down by basically. So that would be a gateway for the Hungarian authorities to legally shut down independent media companies. Another really, really alarming point here is that the money laundering authority would also be entitled to retroactively assess whether a certain media outlet served the agenda of a foreign donor, and then would even require for the funds to be returned. So yes, I remember once this law was introduced, that we had conversations with the journalists from Hungary. They were saying that this law is just simply impossible to follow. One cannot, as a media organization in Hungary that is receiving not just grants, but also receiving support from the audience, cannot not violate this law. It's impossible to comply, basically. But the law was withdrawn. Why this law was withdrawn? It's a very good question, because there is obviously, it's really difficult to say, and there is probably not just one aspect involved, but a few reasons were there. First of all, there was a really strong pressure from the European Commission and from the stakeholders from the EU and from Brussels-based stakeholders. And then also there was in general, there was a really strong international pressure, because it was really clear what this law would mean for the Hungarian media and civil society. And also there was a strong pressure from inside the country. There was pressure from the banking sector. And it was also said that there was pressure from within the party, from within the Fidesz. Not everybody was on the same page when it came to this law. So it was withdrawn, but there have been rumors in the recent days that Hungary might bring it back. Maybe it will change some of the wording. Maybe the law will be diluted. Maybe it will be even stronger and harsher and even more repressive, but nobody knows. Nobody knows yet.
I'm wondering, previously we have seen protests and some pushback against this legislation, and there was also, as you said, international pressure against this draft bill. I wonder if it comes back again, if this international solidarity movement can once again target this law at the same level, and if this would succeed. But also, I'm also curious regarding if this law to be passed, what would happen when an investigative journalist works on the corruption or mismanagement claims regarding foreign funding or foreign investments in Hungary. This will be very interesting to see. But next, I would like to ask you about Georgia. You have been following the developments in Georgia since day one regarding what happened with foreign influence law and regarding all the protest movements as well. So Georgia's law on transparency of foreign influence sparked massive protests in the past year, and we have reported the instances on Mapping Media Freedom database as alerts regarding the media freedom aspect. Yet the government doubled down in 2025 with even harsher legislation. This was quite unexpected looking from outside, but it has come up once again. Why is Georgia's case particularly alarming, looking at all the other countries that have also passed this type of legislations?
Well, Georgia is really a bit of a different case. So the press freedom situation in Georgia or in the region was never rosy. We will always have recorded lots of media freedom violations. Journalists were always subjected to smear campaigns, to defamation. They've been physically attacked as well by mostly far-right groups that were affiliated to the ruling Georgian Dream Party. This was all happening in Georgia, and there was also like really strong institutional pressure because arguably Georgia is a state capture, a very good example of state capture. There now probably all state institutions are captured by the ruling party, the Georgian Dream Party, but before, like one could say that most of the state institutions had no independence, also in the past. But the situation changed drastically, and the media freedom situation deteriorated really rapidly since the first introduction of the foreign agent law, which happened in 2023. There was a really, really strong opposition to this first foreign agent law, and the ruling party, the Georgian Dream Party, as a result of this pressure, international pressure on the one hand, and then pressure from within the civil society and media in the country, they had to withdraw this law a few days after its introduction. They promised that they would never bring it back, but they brought it back. They proposed it, reintroduced it just a year after they've withdrawn it. It's interesting that the same person who announced that it was withdrawn and would never brought back and promised was the one who reintroduced it officially again. Again, in 2024, there was a very strong opposition against the law. Again, like streets in Tbilisi were full of people. Because Georgia's associated this law with adoption of the law with losing country's European path, not and also like losing democracy and also with like scaling back of democratic freedoms as well, obviously. Even though for days and days there were protests in Tbilisi, the ruling Georgian party still adopted the law, and then soon after there were elections in Georgia. The results of these elections, the parliamentary elections, really decisive elections, I would say. The results of these elections are really contested, but the Georgian Dream ruling party, they stayed in power. And soon after, there were protests again because they've promised that Prime Minister from the Georgian Dream ruling party, he basically announced that until 2028 there would be no negotiations related to the EU accession anymore, EU integration. So this was also followed by protests, and these protests were dispersed really violently in the streets of Tbilisi and also in other cities of Georgia. And after that, we have seen every day that the Georgian Dream is adopting a new law or is amending the existing law. And most of these amendments, most of these laws concern media freedom. Okay, first, they have adopted the foreign agent law, which was officially called a law on the transparency of foreign influence. According to this law, 20% organizations receiving at least 20% of their income from abroad would have to register themselves as organizations pursuing interests of foreign power instead of foreign agents like in the very first draft, but that basically didn't really change much, right? Then most organizations went abroad and registered in different countries, most NGOs and media outlets, I mean, including Estonia, Czech Republic, in order to avoid to be part of this registry, in order to avoid to register as foreign agents or organizations pursuing interests of foreign power. And then what Georgian Dream did was to adopt FARA, but FARA, word-to-word translation of American FARA, basically, and with FARA also targets individuals, not just NGOs, not just media outlets. After that, they have amended the law on broadcasting. Broadcasters are just prohibited to receive foreign funding, like radio stations, televisions, they cannot receive foreign funding. They amended the law on grants. So publishers or NGOs that receive foreign funding, they would require pre-approval from the government. So that also basically means that for them also receiving foreign funding is banned. Most of the organizations did not register in the registry, but now we cannot even discuss this anymore because foreign funding is basically banned in the country. And even according to the ruling party, even receiving a training from a foreign principal, like from what they call foreign principal, from a foreign donor organization, is considered a grant. So even, I mean, delivering a training on digital security to Georgian media outlets that are based in the country is a crime, and they might be held accountable for that. So just to go back to your initial question, I don't think that there are many examples where democratic backsliding, it's not democratic backsliding, it's like consolidating authoritarianism happened so quickly, so rapidly, and their journalists have been like the first target and have been exposed to all kinds of threats, including this kind of institutional pressure and repression, as in Georgia. And this all started by adopting foreign agent laws. I mean, foreign agent laws, or laws that basically, we cannot refer to them always as foreign agent laws. There are just like laws, sometimes you can say that there are laws that are restricting foreign funding. They brought a lot of damage to Georgian media. And one can say that now the media in the country is on the brink of survival and might have just months left. So, yeah.
As you mentioned, the US legislation FARA, for members of our audience that might not be familiar with the term, it refers to Foreign Agents Registration Act from the 1930s, when the US passed this legislation to provisionally prevent the Nazi influence by Hitler-led Germany ahead of the Second World War. Of course, they did not know the war was coming back then, but in order to prevent any influence on the American society from Germany, they had prepared this law, which supposedly has set the grounds for other countries to also pass similar laws. And the Georgian Dream Party, much like the Turkish governing party, refers to Western legislations when passing repressive laws. Do you think it is a valid comparison, though? I mean, would you say it is implemented in a similar fashion to the US version of FARA?
Yeah, no, absolutely not. There's the same law was again, like I said, the weaponization of foreign agent laws, FARA mainly, originates in Russia. It was originated in Russia. It was a Russian know-how to use this narrative that, oh, look, this is an American law. If they have it, why should we not have it? It's a good thing. Actually, it was more like Georgian thing that it's American, therefore it's good. Obviously, what matters with laws and any kind of piece of legislation is how they are implemented and in which context are they adopted. So, like you rightly pointed out, Gurkan, the foreign agent law in US was adopted to regulate lobbying, and it was like in 1938 when it was adopted, and it was adopted to regulate lobbying for foreign adversaries such as Nazi Germany. And it's been really the scope of the FARA has been limited through case law, which we don't have in Georgia. Like, we have civil law system, and it has been rarely really employed beyond requiring the registration of foreign lobbyists. That's just not what happened in the US. It was not used, this law was not used against independent journalism. It was not used against human rights NGOs. And while the Georgian draft includes exemptions such as broadcasting networks, which does the US law as well, and scientific, academic, religious, or like different. There is a list of activities that it exempts. We have seen that actually it was applied. Its scope was applied already more broadly, and it included media, and that also happened because of the high level of state capture, absence of checks and balances in the country, absence of judicial independence. The law is being implemented already against, by the way, also against the groups that are defending rights of journalists and media freedoms. So, yeah, like, this comparison is, one can say, irrelevant. But they're using, obviously, this comparison to distract the audiences, I would say. And also, like, there was a lot of conversations about, you said this already in the very beginning, that the one of the major narratives around the foreign agent laws was that, oh, it's for transparency. There is nothing wrong about transparency. That's what the Georgian Dream officials repeated non-stop. There is nothing wrong about transparency, and that's why they are adopting these laws. Honestly, now they're kind of admitting why they adopted these laws, that they adopted it against the NGOs, that they adopted it in order to eradicate them. And yeah, these laws are. I mean, nobody says that we are going to adopt this law because we want to consolidate authoritarianism, because we are against free press, because they don't say this. They also want a bigger reason, that like, there's nothing wrong about transparency. We are adopting this to protect our sovereignty, to protect our national security. But though these laws are against democracy and freedom of expression and freedom of speech, which are cornerstones of any democratic governance.
And as you suggested, let's hope that in the US it does not get used against independent media under Trump administration. Looking at the developments in the US, one cannot help but get concerned about what the future might hold. And having said that, regarding what the Georgian Dream has been doing, again, making a reference to Turkey, that in 2024, when Georgia passed this law, Turkey heavily criticized Georgia and joined the other countries in condemning the passing of this law in Georgia, only to soon after draft the legislation much worse than the original one that was passed in Georgia. And then the Turkish one was withdrawn last year in November during the annual Turkey mission when we were at the parliament, actually. But later on, Georgia passed another one that is even harsher than this one. It started seeming like there is a competition for the worst place in terms of media freedom. I will pass to another question now, Teona. Looking across the examples that you have mentioned, Slovakia, Hungary, and Georgia, what do they reveal about the future of media freedom and foreign funding in Europe? And perhaps you can also touch upon the state of financial crisis that many media organizations are in terms of reclaiming the news organizations by the readership.
The situation is grim. It's getting worse, I would say, because, like, again, we see democratic backsliding across the continent, and obviously journalists are the first ones to be targeted. Independent media is always the first to take the hit. We've just covered these three countries now mostly, and then also we mentioned Turkey, but it's not just these two countries. And it's not just Europe, obviously. Like I mentioned, Russia. It's really interesting that Georgian Dream ruling party, they introduced the Georgian foreign agent law in 2024, 1 or 2 days after it was adopted in Kyrgyzstan. I mentioned Republika Srpska, which adopted the foreign agent law, and I mentioned that, I think I mentioned, right, that this law is also tabled in Serbia. So we see that the authoritarian leaders, illiberal regimes or authoritarian regimes, they are really learning from each other, and they have tested this model, this tool to suppress civil society and independent journalism. At the same time, we see that there are funding cuts. There are, like, media businesses are facing a serious crisis. The advertising revenues are declining. That has been the case for years now. This advertising very often goes to the big tech. So yeah, it's really a critical time for the independent journalism. But yeah, I think that it really, there should be, like I mentioned already, that like sustainable business models are more important than ever, and the attention should be shifted also to that area of how media can be self-sufficient and sustainable. But there is also this thing that, if the state is fully captured, even the sustainable business models cannot help. Georgia is also freezing accounts of journalists, of leaders of NGOs. Zia Maglobeli was sentenced, one of the leading Georgian journalists, a veteran Georgian journalist and founder and director of leading media outlets, has been sentenced to 2 years in prison. And her outlets, the outlets that she founded, their bank accounts have been frozen too. Bank accounts of many other NGOs, media, have been frozen. What do you do in this case, right? So yeah, I think it's really important to see the first signals of media crackdown on media and respond to it immediately. Maybe there should have been probably like a stronger opposition, even like stronger pressure on Georgia when it introduced the foreign agent law for the first time.
Thank you so much, Teona. And today we have discussed the foreign agent laws in Hungary, Slovakia, and Georgia. We as well mentioned the examples regarding Turkey. And I would like to remind our audience to check out our media freedom monitoring reports from the half year 2025 on mappingmediafreedom.org. On our monitoring database, they might find the half year and annual reports, and watch out for the annual report for 2025, which will be published in February 2026. I have today interviewed Teona Sekhniashvili, Europe Network and Advocacy Officer from the International Press Institute, and I am Gürkan Özturan, Media Freedom Monitoring Officer from the European Center for Press and Media Freedom. We would like to thank you for joining us today on Daktilo 1984 screens. Thank you again, Teona.
Thank you very much, Gürkan. It was great talking to you and to your audience.